the first thing I heard was the rain. Not a gentle spring shower that taps politely at the window pane, but a furious wind-driven deluge that hammered against the roof and sluiced in gray sheets down the glass of my front door. It was just after 5 in the morning, that strange, bruised hour between the last vestiges of night and the first hint of dawn. I was awake because my late husband, Mark, had always been an early riser, and in the 3 years since he'd been gone, my body had stubbornly refused to forget his schedule. I was sitting in the dark, cradling a cup of tea, listening to the storm and the creaks of a house that still felt too big for one person. That's when I heard the other sound. It was a faint, muffled cry, almost lost in the percussive drumming of the rain. At first, I dismissed it as a stray cat, one of the neighborhood wanderers seeking shelter under the eaves of the porch. But it came again, a thin, reedy wail that sliced through the noise of the storm with a chilling, unmistakable humanity. A baby. My heart seized in my chest, a cold fist of disbelief and alarm. I set my mug down with a clatter, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent house. My bare feet were cold on the hardwood floor as I moved to the front door, my hand hovering over the deadbolt. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, to call the police, to not engage with whatever madness had deposited a child on my doorstep in the middle of a thunderstorm. But the cry came again, weaker this time, a sound of pure, helpless misery. I couldn't ignore it. With a trembling hand, I turned the lock and pulled the heavy oak door inward. The wind tore at it, trying to rip it from my grasp, and a spray of cold rain misted my face. And there, tucked into the driest corner of the porch, was a wicker laundry basket. It was one of mine, I realized with a jolt of dizzying confusion, one I kept in the guest room. Inside it, swaddled in a thick, sky-blue blanket, was a baby. Its face was red and crumpled from crying, tiny fists flailing weakly. The child couldn't have been more than a few days old. A wave of cold dread, colder than the rain, washed over me. This wasn't random. This was personal. My eyes scanned the darkness beyond the porch light's halo, searching for a car, a figure, anything. There was only the storm, bending the ancient maple tree in my front yard, until its branches groaned in protest. Then I saw it. Tucked into the folds of the blue blanket, just beside the baby's cheek, was a small white envelope. My name, Clara, was written on the front in a looping, vaguely familiar script. My fingers were numb as I plucked it free. The paper was slightly damp, but the ink hadn't run. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of folded stationery. The message was short, just 4 words that shattered the foundations of my world. "He's yours, Mom." I read it once, twice, a dozen times. The words swam before my eyes, nonsensical and monstrous. Mom, no one, had called me that. Mark and I had tried for years, a long, quiet heartache of doctors and disappointments that we had eventually made our peace with. We had built a life, just the 2 of us, full of books and gardening and quiet companionship. Now he was gone, and I was just Clara. Not a mother, never a mother. Who would do this? Who would perform such a breathtakingly cruel act of theater? The baby began to cry again, a raw, desperate sound that seemed to pull at something deep inside me. Shaking, I knelt down, my knees protesting against the cold, damp wood of the porch. I gently lifted the child, basket and all, and carried him inside, shutting the door on the roaring storm. The warmth of the house enveloped us. Under the soft light of the entryway, I looked at him properly for the first time. He was so small, so perfect. A dusting of dark hair, eyes squeezed shut against the world. His crying subsided into soft, snuffing sounds as he felt the warmth. He smelled of rain and something else, something uniquely new and alive. I carried him into the living room and placed the basket on the ottoman in front of the fireplace. I stood there, staring down at him, my mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. The note was still clutched in my hand. "He's yours, Mom." It was a declaration, a verdict. It was also a lie. I had no son. I had no children. I was 46 years old, a widow living a quiet life in a quiet town. My sister, Jenna, was the only family I had left. She lived 2 towns over, and we were close, or so I had always believed. We spoke on the phone every other day. She was the only one who truly knew the depths of my grief over Mark, the only one who understood the hollow space that infertility had carved out in my life. The thought of her brought a strange, sharp pang of something I couldn't name. The handwriting on the note, it was loopy, feminine. Could it be hers? No. The idea was absurd, grotesque. Jenna loved me. She was my baby sister. She couldn't. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, making me jump. It was her. A text message, the screen glowing in the dim light. "Heard the storm. You okay, Clara? Worried about you all alone in that big house." The timing was so perfect it felt scripted. A cold certainty began to bloom in my gut. I ignored the text. My priority was the child. He was stirring, his little mouth making sucking motions. He was hungry. I was completely, utterly unprepared for this. I had nothing for a baby, no formula, no diapers, no anything. My first coherent thought was to call 911. This was a police matter, an abandoned child, a crime. But the note stopped me. It wasn't addressed to occupant or left blank. It was addressed to me, Clara, and it called me Mom. If I called the police, what would I say? How could I explain this? It felt like a trap, carefully laid and expertly sprung. I felt a surge of protective instinct, as primal and unexpected as the storm outside. This tiny, helpless creature had been placed in my care for whatever twisted reason. Before I brought the authorities into this, I needed to understand. I needed to think. I wrapped the baby, still in his blue blanket, in one of Mark's old cashmere sweaters that I kept draped over the armchair. He settled instantly, a warm, solid weight against my chest. I sat down, rocking him gently, my mind racing. The basket, my basket. Someone had been in my house, not just on my porch, but inside my home. They had walked into my guest room, taken the basket, and used it to deliver this child. When? I was a creature of habit. I locked my doors religiously. I would have noticed a break-in, which meant it wasn't a stranger. It was someone who had a key, or someone I had let in. Jenna had a key. She'd had one for years, ever since Mark first got sick. "Just in case, Clara," she had said, her eyes full of sincere concern. "You shouldn't be alone if there's an emergency." I looked down at the sleeping baby in my arms, his face so peaceful, so innocent of the chaos he had brought with him. An emergency. Yes, this was certainly an emergency. But I was beginning to fear that the person I would normally call for help was the very reason I was in danger. The storm raged on, but inside my quiet living room, a different kind of storm was just beginning to gather. I spent the next hour in a state of suspended panic, pacing the floor with the sleeping infant in my arms. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. My mind was a frantic loop of questions, each one darker than the last. Who was this baby? Where did he come from? And the most terrifying question of all, why was he here with me? My first impulse was still to call the police, but the personal nature of the note held me back. It was designed to implicate me, to tangle me in a narrative I didn't understand. "He's yours, Mom." It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact, as if reminding me of something I had conveniently forgotten. It was gaslighting in 4 simple words. I knew I couldn't solve this alone. Despite the chilling suspicion that had taken root in my heart, I needed to see my sister. I needed to look into her eyes when I told her what had happened and gauge her reaction. I needed to see if she would feign shock or if some flicker of guilt would betray her. I laid the baby gently back in his basket, tucking the blankets securely around him. He didn't stir. Then I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Jenna's contact information. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice, to sound like the version of myself she was expecting. Rattled, grieving, and slightly helpless. I pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with manufactured sleepiness. "Clara, it's the middle of the night. Is everything okay?" Her concern sounded so genuine, it almost made me doubt my own intuition. "Jenna," I said, my voice cracking on cue. "Something's happened, something terrible. Can you come over? Please, I need you." There was a pause, just a beat too long, as if she was savoring the moment. "Of course," she said, her tone shifting to one of soothing command. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything. Just lock the doors and wait for me. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up, my hand shaking. "Don't do anything." The words echoed in my head. It wasn't "call the police" or "are you hurt?" It was an instruction, a command to freeze, to wait for the director to arrive on set. While I waited, I went into action. I took the note and the envelope and sealed them in a plastic zip-top bag from the kitchen. Fingerprints. The thought came out of nowhere, a relic from the countless crime novels I read. I then took my own phone and photographed the note, the basket, and the baby from every angle. If things went wrong, if someone tried to twist this, I needed my own record. I sent the photos to my private, password-protected email account with a simple subject line, 5:12 a.m., a timestamp for the beginning of the end. The baby needed changing. A quick, fumbling search of the basket revealed nothing. No diapers, no wipes, no change of clothes. Just the baby and the blue blanket. It was another deliberate choice, designed to create immediate panic and dependence. Whoever did this wanted me overwhelmed, unable to think clearly, forced to reach out for help. I found some old soft cotton towels in the linen closet and fashioned a makeshift diaper. It was clumsy, but it would have to do. The baby woke during the process, his dark eyes blinking slowly, taking in the world with a placid curiosity. He didn't cry, he just watched me, his gaze steady and trusting. My heart ached. He was a real person, a tiny, perfect soul caught in the middle of some cruel game. Headlights swept across the living room wall, and a moment later, I heard Jenna's car door slam. I took another deep breath, schooling my features into a mask of pure distress. I opened the door before she could knock. She stood on the porch, wrapped in a trench coat, her blonde hair plastered to her head by the rain. Her face was a perfect portrait of sisterly concern. "Clara, oh my God, you look like you've seen a ghost. What happened?" she said, rushing inside and enveloping me in a hug that felt both cloying and cold. I let myself sag against her, playing my part. "In the living room," I whispered, and led her by the hand. When she saw the basket on the ottoman, she stopped dead. Her gasp was flawless. She brought a hand to her mouth, her blue eyes wide with what looked, for all the world, like shock. "What is that? Clara, what is going on?" "I found him," I said, my voice trembling. "On the porch, there was a note." I watched her face, searching for any sign, any crack in the facade. There was nothing. She was a consummate actress. She knelt by the basket, her expression softening as she looked at the baby. "Oh, he's beautiful," she breathed. Then she looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Who would do something like this? Abandon a precious child?" She stood up and came to my side, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "And the note? What did it say?" I handed her the plastic bag. She took it, her brow furrowed in confusion at the strange precaution. But she didn't comment on it. She read the words, and her face crumpled in a show of horrified pity. "Oh, Clara! Oh, honey, no!" She pulled me into another hug, this one tighter, more restrictive. "Some sick person is playing a prank, a horrible, vicious prank. They must know about you and Mark." It was the perfect explanation. Plausible, cruel, and designed to prey on my deepest insecurities. It positioned her as my protector, my defender, against a heartless world. "We have to call the police," she said, her voice firm. "Right now. This is a crime scene." She was already pulling out her phone, but I put a hand on her arm. "No, wait," I said. "Jenna, look at the basket. It's from the guest room. And the handwriting. It looks familiar, doesn't it?" I was testing her, pushing just a little to see how she would react. She glanced at the basket, then back at the note in its plastic sheath. She squinted. "I don't know, Clara, I'm not a handwriting expert. And you have so many of these baskets. Maybe you left it on the porch by mistake." Every answer was a deflection, a gentle redirection of my suspicions. She was good, so good. She was already dialing 911. "I'm calling," she said, her voice full of righteous authority. "You're in shock. You're not thinking clearly. Let me handle this." And that was her goal, wasn't it? For me to not think clearly. For her to handle everything. I let her make the call. I listened as she calmly and efficiently explained the situation to the dispatcher, her voice a soothing balm of control and competence. She described me as, "My sister, Clara. She's a widow. She's very distraught." She was already painting a picture, laying the groundwork for the narrative she wanted them to believe. The police arrived within minutes, 2 uniformed officers, a man and a woman, their faces grim and professional. They came in, shaking off the rain, their presence filling my small house with an intimidating authority. Jenna met them at the door, the perfect gatekeeper. She guided them through the story, pointing to the basket, handing over the bagged note, all while keeping a protective arm around me. I felt like a prop in a play that had been written for me. I answered their questions in a quiet, dazed voice, sticking to the facts. The time I found him, the sound of his cry, the contents of the note. The male officer, whose name tag read Miller, had a skeptical look in his eyes. "So you have no idea who this child is, or why someone would leave him with you specifically?" "None," I said. "The note says, 'He's yours, Mom.'" "Do you have any children you've lost contact with? An adoption, perhaps?" the female officer, Sanchez, asked gently. No, I said, the word tasting like ash. I've never had children. Jenna squeezed my shoulder. My sister and her husband tried for years, she supplied, her voice thick with sympathy. This is a particularly cruel thing to do to her. Officer Miller scribbled in his notepad. Did you notice any cars in the area? Anyone on foot? No, just the storm. They took our statements, dusted the basket and the note for prints, and called for Child Protective Services. The whole process was a blur of methodical, impersonal procedure. Through it all, Jenna never left my side. She was my shadow, my spokesperson, my interpreter. When the social worker arrived, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, Jenna was the one who explained the lack of formula and diapers. She made it sound like I was too paralyzed by shock to think of the baby's basic needs, which wasn't entirely untrue, but it was the spin she put on it that chilled me. After they had gone, taking the baby with them, the house fell into a profound silence. The storm had passed, and the first gray light of dawn was filtering through the windows. The absence of the baby was a physical ache in the room. I felt hollowed out. Jenna made us tea, bustling around my kitchen as if it were her own. She sat across from me at the table, her expression one of deep, loving concern. You poor thing, she said, reaching across to pat my hand. I'm going to stay with you for a few days. You shouldn't be alone after a shock like this. And there it was, the trap closing. She wasn't just here to help, she was moving in. In the days that followed, my house ceased to be my own. It became a stage for Jenna's meticulously crafted performance of the concerned caregiving sister. She answered my phone, screened my calls, and spoke in hushed, worried tones to anyone who asked how I was doing. She's fragile, I heard her whisper to our cousin on the phone. This whole thing has just shattered her. She cooked my meals, simple, bland things I had no appetite for, and sat with me while I pushed the food around my plate, her eyes watching my every move. She insisted on sleeping in the guest room, the same room the wicker basket had been taken from. The irony was so thick I felt I could choke on it. Her presence was a constant, oppressive weight. She was everywhere, her bright, false cheer filling every corner of the quiet spaces that had once been my sanctuary. She told me not to worry about the police investigation. They'll handle it, Clara. You just need to rest and recover. But I wasn't resting. At night, I would lie awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the house, trying to piece together the fragments of a puzzle I couldn't fully see. I replayed every conversation, every interaction, searching for the truth beneath the layers of her lies. The police called once. Detective Miller, the skeptical officer from that first morning. Jenna answered, of course. She put him on speakerphone, her hand resting on my shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. Mrs. Wallace, he began, his voice flat and professional. We're still looking into the matter. The prints on the basket and the note were either smudged or they belong to you and your sister. The blanket is a generic brand, no tags. The baby is in good health and is currently in foster care. We've put out an alert, but so far no one has come forward to claim him. He paused. I do have one more question for you. Your sister mentioned that you've been under a lot of stress since your husband's passing. Have you been seeing a doctor? For grief counseling, perhaps? The question was a slap in the face. I could feel Jenna's fingers tighten on my shoulder. She was squeezing a little too hard. My sister has a strong support system, Jenna said smoothly. cutting in before I could answer. I'm making sure she's taken care of. I see, Miller said, his tone unreadable. Well, we'll be in touch if anything develops. He hung up. Jenna let out a sigh. See, they have nothing. It was probably just some desperate teenager who picked your house at random. Don't you worry about it. But I was worried. They were already looking at me, at my grief, at my mental state. Just as she had planned. The first crack in her facade appeared on the third day. I was in my study, ostensibly sorting through some of Mark's old papers, but really just seeking a moment of solitude. The door was ajar, and I heard Jenna in the hallway, on her phone. She was speaking in a low, urgent voice, thinking I was out of earshot. No, it's not enough, she hissed. The payments are due. I told you I would handle it. Just give me a little more time. Everything is falling into place. There was a pause. Don't worry about her. She's completely snowed. She thinks I'm her guardian angel. She laughed, a short, ugly sound that had none of her usual warmth. She'll be declared incompetent before the month is out. Then we'll have access to everything. The house, the accounts, everything. My blood ran cold. I sank into Mark's leather chair, my breath catching in my throat. Incompetent. Access to everything. It wasn't just a cruel prank. It was a calculated plan, a financial motive so banal and so monstrous. Mark had left me very well provided for. The house was paid off, and his life insurance policy had been substantial. I lived simply, but on paper I was wealthy and alone. And Jenna, my sweet, doting little sister, who was always complaining about money, about her dead-end job and her credit card debt. She saw me not as her sister, but as an obstacle, a piggy bank to be broken open. The baby was a tool, a crowbar to pry open my life and declare it unstable. A woman, grieving her husband and their childless life, suddenly claims a baby left on her porch is hers because of a cryptic note? It was a compelling story, a story that would lead any court-appointed psychiatrist to one simple conclusion: delusion, grief-induced psychosis. I felt a surge of white-hot rage, followed by an icy calm. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now joined by something else: resolve. She thought I was snowed. She thought I was fragile. She had underestimated me. From that moment on, everything shifted. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was a survivor, gathering intelligence from behind enemy lines. I had to play her game, but I had to play it better. I continued my performance as the shattered widow. I let her fuss over me. I ate the food she made. I nodded vacantly when she spoke of getting me a nice doctor to talk to. But while I was quiet on the outside, my mind was working furiously. I needed proof, hard, undeniable proof that would tear her story to shreds. I started with the blue blanket. The police had said it was a generic brand, but it felt familiar. On the fourth day, while Jenna was out running errands for me, I went into the guest room, her temporary bedroom. I opened the closet. Tucked away on the top shelf, behind a stack of old towels, was a shopping bag from a department store in the next state, a store I had never been to. Inside was a receipt, dated 2 weeks prior, and on the receipt, among a few other small items, was the purchase of one Azure Sky luxury baby blanket. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was her. She had bought the blanket. This was my first piece of concrete evidence. I took a photo of the receipt and the bag with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to take it 3 times to get a clear shot. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. When she returned, carrying a bag of groceries with a cheerful smile, I felt a profound sense of disconnect. I was looking at a monster who wore my sister's face. That evening, she brought up the topic of doctors again. "Clara, honey," she said, her voice dripping with syrupy concern. "I've been doing some research. There's a wonderful facility, more like a retreat, really. It's called Pine Ridge. They specialize in helping people who've been through trauma. I think it would be so good for you. A place to rest, to heal." I knew what Pine Ridge was. It wasn't a retreat. It was a long-term psychiatric hospital. She was planning on having me committed. "I don't know, Jenna," I said, looking down at my hands. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that." "Nonsense," she said brightly. "I can handle everything here. I'll even talk to your lawyer for you, get all your affairs in order, so you have nothing to worry about." Power of attorney. That was the next step. Once I was in Pine Ridge, she would petition the court, armed with police reports and a narrative of my mental decline, and she would be granted control over my entire life. I had to act fast. The baby. I kept thinking about the baby. Where was he now? Was he safe? Jenna had used him as a pawn, but he was real. A real child whose life she had endangered for her own greed. My resolve hardened. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for him, too, for the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I crept out of my room and went to my study. I turned on my computer and began to search. I looked up Jenna's address, her workplace. I looked for any public records, any hint of the financial trouble she was in. I found more than I bargained for, a string of liens against her property, 2 civil lawsuits from credit card companies, and then the final, damning piece, a recent online search history on her laptop, which she'd brought with her and left carelessly open on the guest room bed. She hadn't cleared the cache. There were searches for how to get power of attorney for a mentally ill relative, short-term infant rentals, and the name of a woman in a town 50 miles away who had recently been arrested for her involvement in an illegal adoption ring. My blood turned to ice. She hadn't just rented a baby. She had sourced him from criminals. She had participated in human trafficking to further her scheme. The scope of her depravity was staggering. I knew then that I couldn't just expose her. I had to be careful. A woman this desperate, this ruthless, was capable of anything. If she suspected I was onto her, she wouldn't hesitate to silence me permanently. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a prison, and I was sharing it with my would-be executioner. The discovery on Jenna's laptop changed the equation entirely. This was no longer just about financial fraud and gaslighting. It was about kidnapping, human trafficking, and a level of calculated evil I could scarcely comprehend. My sister hadn't just used a baby as a prop. She had procured one through a criminal underworld, entangling herself in something far more dangerous than she likely understood. And in doing so, she had put me and that innocent child in unimaginable peril. My strategy had to be flawless. One wrong move, one flicker of suspicion in my eyes, and she might panic. A panicked Jenna was a dangerous Jenna. I realized I couldn't trust the local police, not yet. Detective Miller already viewed me through a lens of pity and suspicion, a perspective Jenna had carefully cultivated. If I went to them now with a wild story about my sister's laptop searches and a half-baked theory about a criminal conspiracy, they would likely see it as further proof of my deteriorating mental state. I needed more than just circumstantial evidence. I needed a confession. I needed to get her on tape, admitting to what she had done. The next morning, I doubled down on my role as the broken, grieving woman. I stayed in my bathrobe all day. I cried at random intervals, staring blankly at the television. I allowed Jenna to coax me into eating small bites of toast, my hands trembling as I held the fork. I had to make her believe her plan was working perfectly, that I was slipping further and further away. I had to inflate her ego, her sense of control, until she became careless. While she was in the shower, I retrieved the small digital voice recorder I used to keep in my study for transcribing notes. Its battery was still good. It was tiny, easily concealable. The challenge was finding a place to put it where it would capture our conversations clearly without being discovered. My living room, where we spent most of our time, was too open. She was constantly tidying, plumping cushions, rearranging coasters. She would find it. But the kitchen, that was a possibility. We ate all our meals at the small wooden table in the breakfast nook. I found the perfect spot. I used clear tape to affix the tiny recorder to the underside of the tabletop, nestled right between the central pedestal and the edge. It was invisible unless you were on your hands and knees looking for it. I set it to voice-activated recording. Now I just had to wait for the right moment to guide the conversation. That afternoon, Jenna brought up Pine Ridge again. She had a glossy brochure. "Look, Clara," she said, her voice gentle as if speaking to a child. "Doesn't it look peaceful? Gardens, art therapy. It's exactly what you need." I took the brochure, my fingers tracing the image of a serene-looking woman painting a watercolor. "Maybe you're right," I whispered, letting a tear roll down my cheek. I feel so lost. Everything feels foggy since Mark died. And now this baby, sometimes I can't tell what's real anymore. It was a risky line, feeding directly into her narrative, but I needed her to believe she had won. Her eyes lit up with a predatory gleam that she quickly masked with pity. "Oh, honey, that's why you need professional help. It's too much for you to handle on your own." "What about my finances?" I asked, my voice small and helpless. "Mark's portfolio, the house bills, I can't even think about it." "Don't you worry your pretty little head about that," she said, patting my hand. Her condescension was so thick it was almost suffocating. "I've already spoken to a lawyer, a friend of a friend. He said it's a simple process. We can assign me as your temporary conservator. I'll manage everything for you, pay the bills, handle the investments. You won't have to think about a single thing except getting better." She was moving so fast, the casual mention of a lawyer sent a fresh wave of terror through me. She wasn't just planning, she was executing. I had to push her. I had to get her to talk about the baby. "I keep thinking about him, Jenna," I said, looking out the window. "That little baby, do you think he's okay? It felt so real when I held him. For a second, I almost believed he was mine." I watched her from the corner of my eye. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face before she replaced it with a patient smile. "Clara, you have to stop this. It was a random, horrible event. You need to put it out of your mind." "But the note," I pressed on, my voice gaining a slightly hysterical edge. "It said Mom. Why would it say that? It's like someone knows how much I wanted to be a mother." I was walking a tightrope, trying to sound delusional enough to be convincing, but not so much that she would call her doctor friends immediately. I needed her to engage, to gloat. "Some people are just cruel," she said, her voice hardening slightly. "They find people's weaknesses and they exploit them. The person who did this is sick." "Or maybe they're smart," I said, turning to look at her directly, my eyes wide and unfocused. Maybe they knew it was the only way to get my attention, to make me listen. She stared at me, her head tilted. "Listen to what, Clara?" This was it. I had to lead her down the path. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The police think I'm crazy, don't they? Detective Miller." He looked at me like I was making it all up. Her expression softened. She thought this was her opening. "He doesn't think you're crazy, honey. He just thinks you're confused. You've been through a lot." "But you believe me, right, Jenna?" I asked, my voice pleading. "You know I wouldn't make something like this up." She took my hands in hers. Her skin was cool and dry. "Of course I believe you, Clara. I'm on your side. I'm always on your side." The lie was so bald, so audacious, that it almost took my breath away. But I held her gaze, forcing myself to look helpless and pleading. The conversation was a dead end for now. She was too disciplined, too focused on the next step in her plan, the conservatorship. She wasn't going to incriminate herself by talking about the baby. I had to create a new catalyst. That night, I waited until she was asleep. I crept into the living room and used my phone to make a call. I called the main number for the police department, not 911. When the night duty officer answered, I spoke in a hushed, frantic voice. "My name is Clara Wallace," I said. "You have a file on me, the baby on the porch. I need to speak to Detective Miller. It's urgent. I have new information." "The detective is off duty, ma'am." "Please," I begged, injecting a note of panic. "It's about the baby. I think I know who his mother is. I think she's coming back." It was a lie, a fabrication designed to force Miller's hand, to make him see me again. I knew he'd be skeptical, but the potential of a break in the case would be too much for him to ignore. I gave him my address again and hung up before the officer could ask any more questions. Then I went back to my room and waited. I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, a car pulled into my driveway. It wasn't a patrol car. It was an unmarked sedan. Detective Miller. I heard Jenna's bedroom door open. "Clara, who's here at this hour?" she called out, her voice sharp with alarm. Her control of the situation was slipping. I met her in the hallway. "It's the police," I said, my eyes wide with fake fear. "I don't know why they're here." The doorbell rang. Jenna shot me a suspicious look before smoothing her robe and going to the door, her public face of concern snapping back into place. "Detective Miller," she said, her voice laced with surprise. "Is everything all right?" "I received a call from your sister," he said, his gaze fixed on me over Jenna's shoulder. "She said she had new information." Jenna turned to me, her smile tight. "Clara, honey, what is this about? We talked about this. You need to let the police do their jobs." "Let us come in, Ms. Clark," Miller said, his tone brooking no argument. He and another plainclothes detective stepped inside. The four of us ended up in the living room. It was all wrong. The recorder was in the kitchen. I had to move them. "Can I get you some coffee, detective?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "It's no trouble." Miller looked like he was about to refuse, but I already on my feet, heading toward the kitchen. "Please, sit down." To my immense relief, they followed me, taking seats at the kitchen table. Jenna followed, hovering behind me like a vulture. "Clara, let me do that," she said, trying to take over. "No," I said, a little too sharply. "I can make a pot of coffee." I busied myself with the machine, my back to them, my hands shaking as I scooped the grounds. My heart was pounding. The recorder was right underneath their elbows. All I had to do was get her to talk. The air in the kitchen was thick with tension. Detective Miller and his partner sat at the table, their expressions impassive, while Jenna stood by the counter, radiating a barely concealed frustration. She wanted to control the situation, to speak for me, but the detective's presence had disrupted her script. I placed coffee mugs on the table, my movements deliberately slow and slightly unsteady, reinforcing the image of a woman on the edge. The small red light on the hidden recorder was not visible, but I knew it was there, silently waiting. I sat down, clutching my own mug for warmth. "Thank you for coming, Detective," I began, my voice a nervous whisper. Miller nodded, his eyes watchful. "Your call was unusual, Mrs. Wallace. You said you knew who the mother was." I took a shaky breath. This was my chance. I had to set the hook. "I've been thinking," I said, looking not at Miller, but at Jenna. "It's all I've been doing, and I realized the person who left him, they didn't just choose my house, they chose me. They knew me." Jenna placed a comforting hand on my arm. "Clara, we've been over this. It was a random act of cruelty." "No," I insisted, my voice rising. "It wasn't. The note. Mom, it was a message, a test, to see what I would do, to see if I would break." Miller leaned forward slightly. "Break how?" "Fall apart," I said, tears welling in my eyes. "So that someone could step in and take care of everything, so that I would seem incompetent." I looked directly at Jenna again. Her smile was frozen on her face, but her eyes had gone cold and hard. She knew where this was going. She just didn't know how I knew. "Clara, honey, you're not making any sense," she said, her voice tight. "You're upset. Detectives, I apologize. My sister has been under an immense amount of strain." "Let her finish," Miller said, his gaze not leaving my face. He was intrigued now. The narrative had shifted from a simple case of child abandonment to something more complex. "The baby," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "He was a key to unlock my life, my finances, my house. If I seemed crazy enough, if I was grieving and delusional, then someone could petition the court. Someone could get power of attorney. Someone could have me put away in a place like Pine Ridge." I said the name of the institution, and I saw a flicker of genuine shock in Jenna's eyes. It was a detail I shouldn't have known. Her composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, standing up abruptly. "My sister is clearly having a paranoid episode. I've been trying to get her help, and this is what I get for it. Accusations? Slander?" "So you admit you've been looking into psychiatric facilities for her?" Miller asked calmly, his pen poised over his notebook. Jenna's face flushed. "I was concerned. I still am. Look at her. She's concocting conspiracy theories." I started to cry, real tears of fear and stress this time. "She's lying," I sobbed. "She bought the blanket he was wrapped in, the blue one, from a department store in Kenwood. She's been making calls to creditors, telling them she'll have access to my account soon. She searched for short-term infant rentals on her laptop." Each statement was a hammer blow. Jenna's face went from red to a pasty white. She was cornered, and she knew it. "She went through my things? Through my private computer?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Do you see? She's paranoid. She's spying on me." "Is what she's saying true, Ms. Clark?" Miller's partner asked, his voice low and even. "Did you make those searches?" "No, of course not. She's making it all up." Jenna was breathing heavily, her eyes darting between the detectives and me. She looked like a trapped animal. I knew I had to deliver the final blow. I had to get her to confess, right here, right now. "Jenna," I said, my voice suddenly calm and clear. "Tell them where you got the baby, the woman you contacted, the one who was arrested last week. Did you know you were participating in human trafficking? Is my money worth a child's life?" The color drained completely from her face. That was the detail she never thought I could know, the connection to a real active criminal case. Her bravado crumbled, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice cracking. "She said the baby was from a surrogate who changed her mind. She said it was all legal. I was just borrowing him. I was going to give him back." She clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with the horror of what she had just admitted. The kitchen fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet scratching of Detective Miller's pen. He hadn't missed a word. "You were borrowing him?" Miller repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Jenna began to sob, collapsing into her chair. "I'm in so much trouble," she wailed, her carefully constructed world imploding around her. "I have so much debt. The house, they were going to foreclose. I didn't know what else to do. Clara has so much, she doesn't even use it. It just sits in the bank. I just needed to get control for a little while, to sort myself out. I wasn't going to hurt her. I was going to put her in a nice place, a comfortable place." Her confession poured out in a torrent of self-pity and greed. She admitted everything. The plan to have me declared incompetent, the lawyer she'd contacted, the faked concern, the baby. She laid her rotten soul bare, right there at my kitchen table. I just sat there, numb, listening to the sister I thought I knew describe in detail how she had planned to destroy my life for money. The woman who had held my hand at our parents' funerals, who had brought me soup when I had the flu, who I had loved and trusted without question. She wasn't my sister. She was a stranger, a monster. Miller finally stood up. "Jenna Clark," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing a false police report, and reckless endangerment of a child. There will likely be other charges." His partner was already behind Jenna, pulling her hands behind her back. She didn't resist. She just kept crying, muttering about her debt, about how unfair it all was. As they led her out of my kitchen, her eyes met mine one last time. There was no remorse in them, no apology, only a raw, venomous hatred. The look of a predator who had been outsmarted by her prey. After they were gone, the house was preternaturally quiet. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the half-empty coffee mugs. Then I leaned down, my hand trembling, and retrieved the small digital recorder from beneath the table. I clicked the stop button. I had it all, every self-serving, incriminating word. I had won, but it felt nothing like a victory. It felt like standing in the rubble of my own life. The foundations burned to the ground by the one person I thought would always help me rebuild. The aftermath was a slow, surreal unwinding of the nightmare Jenna had woven around me. The hours after her arrest were a blur of more questions, more statements, this time with a different tenor. Detective Miller was no longer looking at me as a potential victim of delusion, but as the survivor of a calculated and nearly successful plot. He listened intently as I played back the recording from the kitchen, his expression growing grimmer with every word of Jenna's confession. The digital recorder, my tiny secret weapon, became the cornerstone of the case against her. They took it as evidence, along with her laptop and the department store receipt I had found. My home, which had been a prison for the past week, was now a crime scene again. But this time, I was not a person of interest. I was the primary witness. That first night alone, after the detectives had finally gone and a profound quiet had settled over the house, was the hardest. Every shadow seemed to hold a memory of Jenna's betrayal. Every creak of the floorboards echoed with her lies. I walked through the rooms, from the living room where she had feigned shock to the kitchen where her world had collapsed, and felt like a ghost in my own home. I stripped the bed in the guest room, stuffing the sheets and blankets she had used into a garbage bag. I didn't want any trace of her left. It was a futile gesture, I knew. She had left a stain on my life that could never be fully washed away. The legal proceedings moved with a speed that surprised me. Faced with the recording of her own confession, the evidence from her laptop, and the testimony of the woman from the illegal adoption ring who quickly turned on her to save herself, Jenna had no choice but to plead guilty. Her lawyer had tried to build a defense around her desperation and debt, painting her as a victim of circumstance, but the cold, premeditated nature of her plan was undeniable. The baby, whose name I learned was Leo, was a key piece of the puzzle. He had been taken from a young, vulnerable mother who was tricked into giving him up by the adoption ring. Thanks to Jenna's arrest and the subsequent investigation, Leo was reunited with his birth mother. I received a short, formal letter from Child Protective Services informing me of the outcome. I read it with a profound sense of relief, my heart aching for the terror his mother must have endured. He had been a pawn in my story, but he was the hero of his own. I never saw him again, but I thought of him often, this tiny stranger who had inadvertently saved my life. My testimony was given in a closed courtroom. I had to recount everything from the moment I found Leo on my porch to the final venomous look Jenna gave me as she was led away. I spoke into a microphone, my voice steady, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. I did not look at her. I couldn't. To look at her would be to acknowledge the sister she once was, and that person was gone, replaced by the calculating monster she had become. The memory was too painful to bear. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison, conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping. The judge called her actions a chilling betrayal of familial trust and an act of profound moral depravity. I felt nothing as I heard the sentence. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a vast, empty sadness. The world I had known, the simple certainties of family and love, had been irrevocably broken. Rebuilding was a slow and painful process. For weeks I felt adrift. The house was too quiet. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, laden with the ghosts of what had happened. Simple things, like a ringing phone or a knock at the door, would send a jolt of anxiety through me. I saw suspicion in every friendly face, a potential motive behind every kind gesture. Trust, once broken so catastrophically, does not mend easily. I started therapy with a woman named Dr. Anya Sharma. She was patient and kind, and she helped me navigate the complex terrain of my grief, not just for Mark, but for the sister I had lost, for the illusion of the life I thought I had. "You survived something extraordinary, Clara," she told me during one session. "You can't expect to feel ordinary for a while. Your instincts saved you. You need to learn to trust them again." Slowly, tentatively, I began to reclaim my life. I started in the garden, Mark's old sanctuary. I pulled weeds with a vengeance, yanking out the creeping vines that had taken hold during my week of captivity. I planted new flowers, bright, defiant bursts of color, marigolds, zinnias, cosmos. I found a strange solace in the simple act of nurturing life, of bringing order and beauty to a small patch of earth. One day, while I was kneeling in the dirt, my hands covered in soil, Detective Miller's unmarked car pulled up to the curb. He got out and walked up the path, his expression softer than I had ever seen it. "Mrs. Wallace," he said, stopping a few feet away. "I was in the neighborhood, just wanted to see how you were doing." "I'm all right, Detective," I said, shielding my eyes from the sun. "Thank you." He nodded, looking at the newly planted flower beds. "I also wanted to apologize," he said, his voice quiet. "When I first met you, I didn't see you clearly. I saw what your sister wanted me to see. I was wrong." The apology was unexpected, and it meant more to me than he could ever know. It was an acknowledgement that I wasn't crazy, that my reality was real. "You listened when it mattered," I told him. "That's what counts." He stayed for a few more minutes, making small talk about the weather and the neighborhood. Before he left, he said, "You're a strong woman, Mrs. Wallace. Don't ever forget that." His words stayed with me long after he was gone. Strength wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about what you do after you've been shattered. It was about picking up the pieces, however sharp and jagged, and finding a way to put them back together into a new shape. A different shape, perhaps, but one that was still whole. My life is different now. The circle of my trust has grown smaller, but its foundations are stronger. I no longer take anything for granted. I've sold the big house, the one filled with too many memories and too many ghosts. I live in a smaller place now, a condo with a balcony overflowing with flower boxes. It's enough for me. I am still alone, but I am not lonely. I have found a quiet peace in my solitude, a strength I never knew I possessed. Sometimes, on stormy nights, I think back to that morning, to the sound of a baby's cry, cutting through the rain. I think about the note, the basket, the beginning of the end. "He's yours, Mom." Jenna meant for those words to be a weapon, a tool to destroy me. But in the end, she was wrong. The baby was never mine. But in saving him, in fighting for the truth, I learned to become my own protector, my own advocate. In a way, I had to learn to mother myself back to life, and that is a part of me that is truly unshakably mine. The process of healing was not a straight line. It was a jagged, spiraling path, with days of bright, clear-headed peace, followed by nights when I'd wake up gasping, the phantom weight of Jenna's hand on my shoulder, her voice whispering poison in my ear. Dr. Sharma called these emotional echoes, the remnants of trauma that reverberate long after the event has passed. She encouraged me to find new routines, to overwrite the old patterns that were now tainted by memory. I started small. I changed the brand of tea I drank. I rearranged the furniture in my new condo. I took a different route on my daily walks. Each change was a tiny declaration of independence, a reclaiming of my own narrative. I began volunteering at the local library, a place that had always been a refuge for me. The quiet, ordered world of books was a balm to my frayed nerves. I spent hours shelving books, the repetitive, physical task calming my mind. I helped children find stories, their bright, innocent faces a stark contrast to the darkness I had endured. It was there, amidst the dusty shelves and the hushed whispers, that I began to feel like myself again. Not the old Clara, the naive woman who had trusted so blindly, but a new version, warier perhaps, but also wiser, more resilient. One afternoon, a young woman came in with a baby strapped to her chest in a carrier. The baby had a familiar dusting of dark hair and large, curious eyes. My breath caught in my throat. For a wild, irrational moment, I thought it was him, Leo. The woman smiled at me, a tired but happy smile. "Can you recommend a good board book?" she asked. "Something with lots of colors. He loves colors." I found myself smiling back, a genuine, unforced smile. "I have just the thing," I said, and led her to the children's section. The moment passed, the brief surge of adrenaline faded, and I was left with a strange sense of peace. The world was full of mothers and babies, of ordinary lives unfolding in ordinary ways. My own story had been an aberration, a violent disruption of that natural order. But it was over. The echoes were fading. I received a letter from Jenna once, a few years into her sentence. It had been forwarded from my old address. Her handwriting was the same looping script that had been on the note, and seeing it on the envelope made my stomach clench. I almost threw it away, but curiosity, that stubborn human impulse, won out. I opened it. It was not an apology. It was a long, rambling tirade of self-pity and blame. She blamed our parents for favoring me. She blamed Mark for leaving me so much money. She blamed her creditors, her boss, the legal system, and most of all, she blamed me. "You had everything, Clara," she wrote, "and you couldn't even share. You let them send me here, your own sister. I hope you're happy, all alone in that big house with your precious money." I read the letter, and I felt nothing. The rage and the pain she had once been able to inflict upon me were gone, replaced by a profound and weary pity. She was trapped, not just in a prison cell, but in the prison of her own resentment, a place from which she would likely never escape. I tore the letter into small pieces and let them fall into the trash. She was a part of my past, a closed chapter. She had no more power over me. My new life began to take shape, built not on the rubble of the old one, but on fresh ground. I made friends at the library. I joined a book club. I started taking a pottery class, finding a deep satisfaction in taking a shapeless lump of clay and molding it into something beautiful and strong. I learned that I was not defined by the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I was defined by how I had survived it. One of the most difficult steps was dealing with my family's legacy. Jenna had weaponized our shared history, our parents' memory, everything. I had to find a way to separate the good memories from the poison she had injected into them. I took out the old photo albums, the ones I had packed away after her arrest. I looked at the pictures of us as children, two little girls with matching dresses and bright, hopeful smiles. I felt a pang of grief for that little girl, for the sister I thought I had, the one who had gotten lost somewhere along the way, consumed by jealousy and greed. I couldn't save that girl. I couldn't even mourn her properly because she had tried to destroy me. So I did the only thing I could. I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. I forgave her so that I could let go of the anger, that still sometimes flared in the quiet moments. I forgave her so that I could remember my parents' love without the shadow of her betrayal falling over it. It was a quiet, personal act of liberation. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. It was enough that I knew. The final piece of my healing came from an unexpected source. Detective Miller retired a few years after Jenna's conviction. He looked me up. He was writing a memoir about his years on the force, and he wanted to include a chapter on my case with my permission. He called it The Blue Blanket, and he wanted to frame it as a story not about the crime, but about the survivor's intuition. We met for coffee. He was older now, softer around the edges, the hard cynicism of his job replaced by a grandfatherly warmth. He showed me the draft of the chapter. He had written it with incredible respect and sensitivity. He portrayed me not as a victim, but as the quiet, observant woman who had outwitted a predator. He had captured the truth of it. "You know," he said, stirring his coffee, "in all my years I've seen a lot of bad things, but your case, it stuck with me. The way she used your love, your history, against you, it was a special kind of evil." "But it didn't work," I said, and the words felt true and solid in my mouth. "No," he agreed, a small smile on his face. "It didn't." Giving him my permission to tell my story felt like the final step in reclaiming it. For so long, it had been a secret source of shame and fear. But now it was just that. A story about betrayal, yes, but also a story about strength, about listening to that small, quiet voice inside that tells you when something is wrong. A story about survival. Today, my life is quiet, but it is not small. It is filled with books and flowers and the warm, steady companionship of friends. I am happy. It's a different kind of happiness than I had known with Mark, less about shared joy and more about a deep internal sense of peace. A peace I fought for, a peace I earned. I will never be a mother in the traditional sense. That path was not meant for me. But I've learned that nurturing comes in many forms. I nurture my garden. I nurture my friendships. I nurture the quiet, resilient woman I have become. The storm passed, the monster was vanquished, and in the quiet aftermath, I found myself whole and unbroken, standing in the sun.